I have written, no doubt jihad is a directive of Islam. For me, the question is not whether jihad is a directive or not. I begin by affirming jihad as an indisputable part of Islam. The Quran requires of its followers that if they have the capability, they should wage war against oppression and injustice. I have also discussed this issue at length in many of my lectures and writings. In my book, Meezan, there is an entire chapter titled The Islamic Law of Jihad. Therefore, without elaborating too much, I will only mention the principal points here. The Quran requires of its followers that if they have the capability, they should wage war against oppression and injustice. It is clear from what I've written that the directive of jihad is not given against disbelief, polytheism, or apostasy. Jihad is not carried out on religious grounds, nor is it a directive based on religion. The directive of killing, which has to do with religious principles, is an entirely different matter, and we have already discussed that in previous lectures. It is not related to jihad. The directive of jihad has been given neither for religion, nor for conquering the world, nor for expanding an empire, nor for gaining riches and wealth. It is simply a directive to fight against oppression and tyranny. The principle here is the same as we had discussed with regard to penal laws. You have been given this directive in order to help the oppressed. God's directive is consistent in principle. When you have state power, you can punish the criminals for their crimes and stand with the victim. If a nation commits oppression, then you are required to stand with the oppressed. This is what we have been ordered to do. The Quran requires of its followers that if they have the capability, they should wage war against oppression and injustice. The part we must emphasize is, if you have the capability, all the directives of Islam are based on one's capability to carry them out. Only if a person has the strength will one pray or observe fasts. The same goes with fighting. But what is the objective of fighting? In order to put an end to oppression and tyranny, what is universally known as oppression and tyranny. If this oppression has been committed within a state, the police will apprehend the aggressor. A due process will be followed. The court of law will pronounce a punishment, and the criminal would be brought to justice. If the oppression has been committed by another nation, it is obviously outside the jurisdiction of our police. The municipal law cannot operate in this domain, and therefore, sometimes a military action may need to be taken. This kind of fighting is allowed in Islam and in certain cases becomes necessary. According to the Quran, the primary reason of this directive is to curb fitna, meaning persecution. The Quran has not used the words oppression and tyranny. It mentions curbing fitna as the objective of fighting. So what is fitna? What is persecution? The word fitna in Quranic terminology means forcing a person to give up his religion. Therefore, the fighting directly prescribed in the Quran is the one against religious persecution. If a person is being persecuted and subjected to cruelty on the basis of his religion, fighting has been ordained to rescue that person from persecution. But certain other texts of the Quran also suggest that it is permissible to fight against any other kind of oppression as well. But the original logic of fighting had been to end religious persecution. The scholars know that Muslims have not been directed to do jihad in their individual capacity. They are addressed in their collective capacity regarding this directive. Unlike the daily ritual prayer, this directive has not been given to an individual. Rather, it is addressed to the Muslims collectively. Muslims, in their collective capacity, have been made responsible for putting an end to oppression when, and particularly when, people are under religious persecution. Religious persecution is actually a kind of rebellion against God. The Quran has made this clear in several passages. God has stated that his scheme is to allow humans the freedom to make their choice. While addressing his messengers on multiple occasions, God says that it is not as if it was difficult for him to turn all people into believers. So the messengers ought not to worry on this count. God himself has decided to give people the freedom of choice. The Quran has explicitly stated that there is no compulsion in religion. Guidance is made distinct from error. God has not allowed for coercion in religious matters. Thus, forcing people to accept or reject a religion is tantamount to a declaration of war against the Almighty. It entails that a fundamental right given by God is taken away from someone. It is a serious matter on which the Quran has made its stance clear. There are two forms of oppression and tyranny that fall under it. They are its branches, or to put it in purely legal terms, they are based analogically on the original principle. I've tried to point out many times that the people who lecture a lot on jihad do not speak out against oppression and persecution when it actually occurs in the world. It becomes clear that there are political motivations behind this. Otherwise, prior to this, no one was prepared to speak out against the persecution existing in the early 20th century in many parts of the world. To even take the name of this Quranic directive, where Quranic propagation was disallowed and where mosques were shut down, I am sorry to say this, but it has often been the case that the matter is more of a political nature. Had it been a religious matter, then people should have been more sensitive to this issue directly addressed in the Quran. The religious parties would have taken out protests on this issue, printed posters, and rallied people for jihad. Have you ever heard one word in this regard? Therefore, in my view, it is not a religious issue at all. You can watch my lectures on jihad from my book Meezan. I also refuse to accept the common assertion that jihad is carried out for one's defense. I have not conformed to that line. I have only stated that jihad is carried out against oppression and tyranny. Aggression is also a form of oppression. We defend against any undue aggression because we are supposed to be fighting against oppression. Fighting against oppression and tyranny can be defensive as well as offensive. For example, some people in a country are being slaughtered. Or take the example I gave, where people are prevented from performing Hajj or their daily ritual prayers or propagating their religion. All these are examples of persecution. These are occurring in the world even today. But no one is prepared to speak out against them. I had written that scholars know that Muslims are not given this directive of jihad in their individual capacity. They are addressed in their collective capacity regarding this directive. Here, I have clarified the second misconception. All religious directives are not meant for the individual. A number of them are addressed to the people, and some of them to their collectivity, that is, their state authorities. When a directive is addressed to the collectivity, they are represented by the collective system. This system can be of a tribal nature, or it can take the form of a modern nation state. In the case of jihad, the Muslim society has been addressed as a whole, that if they have the requisite strength, they should fight any oppression. This is based on another principle of the Quran, which states that God does not burden a soul more than it can bear. It is not possible for an individual to confront the oppression which is carried out at the state level. Therefore, this directive has also been given at the state level with due consideration of the capability required. I'm merely pointing out certain fundamental points regarding jihad. As for elaboration, I have done that elsewhere. Muslims are addressed in their collective capacity regarding this directive. They are not individually addressed in the verses of jihad which occur in the Quran. Thus, in this matter, only the collectivity has the right to launch any such armed offensive. So the first thing to know is that jihad is only carried out against oppression and tyranny. This directive is primarily about fighting against persecution, and finally, it is addressed to the collective system of Muslims. To state more systematically, It is addressed to Muslims as a whole, and they are represented by their authorities. I had written that no individual or group of Muslims has the right to take this decision on their behalf. For example, if I am the head of my family, I am the one to decide the necessary steps to be taken against the excesses of the landlord living in my neighborhood. The other members of the family may not have this right. Similarly, you and I do not have the right to decide what step to take on behalf of others against oppression and tyranny. This would lead to anarchy. The decision can only be taken by the collective system of Muslims if it exists in the form of a parliament or any other authoritative body based on any considerations of expediency, etc. It is for this reason that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, "A Muslim ruler is the shield of his people. A war can only be carried out under him, and people should seek his shelter in war." Whatever I have explained here about jihad was only to point out a few important matters. If you wish to get a summary, you can refer to my book Al-Islam. In English, it is called Islam, a Concise Introduction, where I have enumerated the entire law of jihad in a few points. If you want to study the detailed law of jihad along with all the references and arguments, then you need to refer to my book Meezan, which in English is Islam, a Comprehensive Introduction. Because I have yet again taught this portion of Meezan, I won't be going into the details here. You can go through that chapter and listen to the lectures where I have discussed even the minute details. Now, I shall move ahead to the 7th point of the counter-narrative article. The directive of jihad given by Islam is war for the cause of God. Therefore, it cannot be waged while disregarding moral restrictions. In other words, the Islamic directive to fight against oppression and tyranny is actually a fight in the path of God. Its aim is to prevent the oppressor from oppressing anyone and helping the afflicted party. It is a significant righteous deed and a sacred obligation. We express our gratitude to God for including this directive in our religion, but we are obligated to carry out this directive only when we have the capacity to do so. I have also discussed the proportion of numbers between the Muslims and their adversaries that was fixed by the Almighty in the presence of His Messenger, and upon which they were promised victory. You can refer to those lectures of mine. Thus, being a fight in God's path, some ethical limits have been placed on it by the Almighty. The dealings of God with humans are entirely based on moral principles. Therefore, jihad cannot be carried out by disregarding these ethical limits. Morality is paramount in all situations, and God has not permitted anyone to violate them, even in war. Ethical limits cannot be transgressed in the name of jihad. The Quran is absolutely clear on this. I have discussed all the passages from the Quran concerning ethical limits in my book, Meezan, in the chapter on jihad. For example, if you are fighting against persecution, which is the primary objective of jihad, you cannot take any action against a nation involved in the persecution of Muslims as long as you have a treaty with them. The sanctity of a treaty has foremost importance. First, you would need to withdraw from that treaty, and only then can you take any action. I have already told you about the people to whom the truth was conclusively communicated by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and whom God decided to punish in this very world. Some of them had treaties with the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. The Quran, in Surah Tawbah, before calling on Muslims to take the final steps, asks them to fulfill the treaties until their time expires and not to enter in any new treaty. Therefore, moral standards are always paramount according to the Quran. Ethics and morality supersede everything in all circumstances, and even in matters of war and armed offensives. The Almighty has not allowed Muslims to deviate from moral principles. Hence, it is an absolute that jihad can only be waged against combatants. If we are to enumerate all the moral principles in the world, the foremost principle would be the sanctity of life, and it cannot be violated. It is the supreme human right, the greatest human value. The Quran itself has described it in a similar fashion. He who killed a human being without the latter being guilty of killing another or of spreading anarchy in the land should be looked upon as if he killed all mankind. In other words, if we were to list all the ethical misconducts, murder would be right at the top. If you have transgressed against a single human, the Quran holds it tantamount to transgression against the entire humanity. It is like killing all humanity. Such is the severity of this crime. That is why the first thing I have mentioned is that jihad can only be waged against combatants. In other words, only when someone has picked up a weapon against you can you justifiably go on the offensive against him. Until then, he is not a combatant. It is the law of Islam that if a person attacks through his tongue, then this attack shall be countered through the tongue. You must recall that the Taliban had argued against Malala Yousafzai that she was involved in propaganda against them. This was their justification to shoot her. In response, I had responded by saying that they too could engage in propaganda against her. If she had spoken against them, they were capable of going on a verbal offensive too. I had written, "It is the law of Islam that if a person attacks through his tongue, then this attack shall be countered through the tongue, and if he financially supports the warriors, then he will be stopped from offering this support. However, unless a person picks up arms to wage war, his life cannot be taken." This is because a life has sanctity, and since injuring one human life is tantamount to injuring the entire humanity, one has to justify one's right by which one is entitled to take an action. And this right is only achieved when the other person becomes a combatant. You can understand this by an example. Let us say we tell a person that he is committing oppression. For example, a neighboring country of ours is committing oppression against some minority or some people. You call on this country to stop this oppression, and it agrees to a dialogue with us on this issue. Then you cannot attack this country. You can try to stop this oppression and take to arms only if that country resorts to arms first. From this perspective, you can take military action against them only in response to an action from their side. Apparently, the action seems to be initiated from your side, but in all cases, it is a result of the other person being a combatant. If he drops his weapon, then the matter rests. Now, the discussion will be pursued on the negotiation table. I had written, "It is the law of Islam that if a person attacks through his tongue, then this attack shall be countered through the tongue, and if he financially supports the warriors, then he will be stopped from this support. However, unless a person picks up arms to wage war, his life cannot be taken. So much so, if right in the battlefield an enemy throws down his weapons, he shall be taken a prisoner. He cannot be executed after this." The Quran has explained this directive in Surah Muhammad, where the first proper order of fighting was given. That verse should be studied very keenly. In this, God talks about people who have transgressed against Him and are about to attack the Muslims. They will then become combatants. Therefore, all your focus now needs to be killing them. When you meet the disbelievers in battle, smite their necks, and once they are defeated, bind any captives firmly. Later you can release them by grace or by ransom until the toils of war have ended. So, when prisoners are taken, the matter is closed. This rule is accepted globally that if an enemy soldier who moments ago had been shelling you surrenders his arms, then you cannot kill him. The global system accepts this principle, and human intellect also favors it. Modern standards, just like Islam, also accept it. You will fight the combatants when they have come to fight you. But if they throw down their weapon in the battlefield, then, under the universally agreed principles, They have some rights, and you cannot do them any harm. The words of the verse which mention the directive of jihad are, "And fight in the way of God with those who fight against you, and do not transgress bounds in this fighting. Indeed, God does not like the transgressors." People who do not participate in fighting against us cannot be fought. They can only be engaged in talks. The Prophet, peace be upon him, forbade the killing of women and children during war. The reason for this is that if they have embarked upon jihad with the army, it is not in the capacity of combatants. In the ancient period, sometimes women and children used to accompany the fighters to the battlefield, but they were not usually combatants. At best, they would boost the morale of the combatants and urge them to fight through poetry or percussive instruments. So, for the most part, they had a supporting role. Therefore, all you have to do is stop them from helping their fighters. You cannot take any steps beyond this. These are a few things that I have highlighted in my counter-narrative and which are being constantly violated by people with brazen arrogance. And in the narrative of the Muslim clergy, these ethical precepts are being ignored, and in reality, arguments have been formulated to undermine them. It was not my objective here to go into much detail. The major points that I wanted to highlight are as follow. 1. Jihad is only carried out against oppression and tyranny. 2. Muslims have not been given this directive in their individual capacities, but in their collective capacity. Therefore, the Muslim government will make a decision about it. 3. Ethical limits will always be observed. We cannot, by any logic, kill innocent people going about their business. 4. Only the combatants can be fought and killed, and only as long as they remain combatants. If they throw down their weapons in the battlefield, they can only be taken as prisoners and cannot be killed. God has not given us this right. Thus, innocent people, women and children who are not combatants cannot be killed using any argument, such as saying that they support their government and pay tax to them. I am talking of people who accompany the soldiers in a battlefield but are not combatants. Islam does not allow one to kill them, nor do common moral standards, and international laws allow it. So these were some major points that have been defied, and people have tried to formulate bogus arguments in their defiance. I have probed these matters here. What is the complete law of jihad? What are its conditions? What are the relevant textual evidences? I have addressed these questions in my book Meezan, or Islam, a comprehensive introduction. Those of you who want to study it can go through that portion of my book and listen to the associated lectures on that chapter. I have further elaborated many other points in those lectures. The 6th and 7th points of my article end here.
Shirk, or polytheism, has also been called zulm, meaning oppression, in the Quran. So, can it be said that action against shirk is also an action against oppression?
The word zulm is used in two ways in the Arabic language. In the Quran also, it has been used in both senses. One is in zalimun li nafsi. It means a person oppressing his own self. When it is said that shirk is a great oppression, it means that a person oppresses himself. The oppression and tyranny that we are discussing is the one perpetrated against others. Shirk is an oppression on one's own self. So who will you fight against? Of course, only against yourself.
After the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his companions took active military steps to crush kufr and shirk, undertook several battles and conquered many lands. Where do you place these?
In my books and lectures, I have discussed at length the places where the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, completed the Hujjah. I have divided them in three parts. The first was his Itmam al-Hujjah on the Quraysh as he migrated to Medina. In Medina, he performed Itmam al-Hujjah on the Jews and Christians. Then, 4 years before he passed away, he expanded this process and completed the Hujjah on Roman and Persian empires. I have written a separate article explaining how Itmam al-Hujjah takes place. Some people raise a question here that does Itmam al-Hujjah take place by merely writing a few letters? I have responded to this question and said that this process consists of 3 points that must be fulfilled. All 3 were fulfilled in the case you asked about. After this, you can appreciate that the punishment that was meted out to the disbelievers in the presence of the Holy Prophet was continued by the companions afterwards. Now, when its details were recorded in history, the historians, being humans, transcribed certain statements in their own way, just as this whole law was misunderstood by the people in later generations. I have also explained that in the case of the companions, it can be said with satisfaction that they did not go beyond the scope of this Itmam al-Hujjah. But even if they had gone beyond the jurisdiction of this law, would we make it an argument or say that it was a wrong decision on their part? The only proof in God's religion is the person of the Prophet. No person, however great he may be, no authority, however grand it be, even the rightly guided caliphate can make a mistake in understanding something. But this has not happened. By God's grace, they confined themselves to the sphere demarcated by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. In fact, they remained very anxious about the campaigns extending beyond the Arabian Peninsula. We find many such things about Caliph Umar in the historical record, but our historians did not understand what this entire matter was. In those times, conquests were very common, and they saw these campaigns of the companions in the same light and thought that they were performing a religious duty to spread the religion. In simple words, all those campaigns were merely the consequence of the manifestation of a divine judgment following the Itmam al-Hujjah of a messenger of God. They were not campaigns of jihad.